Hello, everyone. This is Maurice Fernandez, and I'm welcoming you to the transit of Uranus in Taurus. Uranus enters Taurus on May 15, 2018, and auspiciously or not, it will square Mars at 0 degrees Aquarius at the same time. So Uranus rules Aquarius, so as it squares that Mars. I will show you the charts. But this promises to be really a very interesting ride. Before we delve into the depth of this archetype and influence, I'd like to introduce you to my work. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and I'm the president of OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology. It's open to everyone, not just professionals. And I really encourage you to check it out. It's a great support system and way to be involved in a greater community of astrologers. Beyond that, I teach many courses. You will see on my website. Those of you who would like to take astrology more seriously and really master star knowledge, I encourage you to take astrology more seriously. So you can check smaller workshops such as Chiron and astronomy, aspects, moon and Venus cycles. There's a wealth of articles and recordings. Some are free, some you purchase and help, sustain the astrologer. Um, I will also release a new book the end of May. It's called Neptune, the 12th House, and Pisces, which I encourage you to check out. So, as we move forward, I would like to also introduce you to our program with OPA. It's called Astrologer, which will take place in October this year in Tucson, Arizona. And this is for people who are already ready to become astrologers. So it helps those who would like to make a living from astrology really know how to proceed. So some of the best in the field are there to mentor people who would like to become astrologers. So we're not studying astrology there per se, but we're studying how to launch our practice and what does it take to have clients. Check it out again. This is an OPA offering on the opaastrology.org website. So back to Uranus. The interesting thing about Uranus is that Uranus is the lord of the sky and Taurus is the earth. So here are interesting illustrations where you see a meteorite hitting the earth, and then you have a cow flying in space. Very unlikely events, but it captures the energy and I would say, very complex dynamics of connecting above and below, connecting what is organic and what is virtual. Taurus is organic, it's food and earth and body. Uranus is mind and thoughts and transcendence and everything that is beyond the physical. It is actually against biology. So what will be? What can we expect? Let's continue our exploration. This is the chart of the day Uranus enters Taurus, and as you can see, it will exactly square Mars, as I mentioned, in Aquarius. Uranus rules Aquarius, so it's very potent. Now, Mars will also retrograde the whole summer in the northern hemisphere summer. So in the course of June, July, August, Mars will be in these early degrees of Aquarius, back and forth, retrograding, and Uranus moves very slowly, so it's barely going to move only 2 degrees into Taurus. And so this Mars-Uranus square will remain for at least 3 months, 3 to 4 months. And as you can see, it's also on the nodal axis, which happened to be in Aquarius and Leo. Whew, it's intense. So what can we expect? Let's continue and check our options. So here is the illustration, beautiful painting of Uranus and Gaia, and that's the mythology when Uranus, the Lord of the sky, came every night from the heavens to mate with Gaia, the earth goddess. And so there was a union between the heaven and the earth. And Uranus was quite horny, he wanted more, and he basically ended up forcing himself upon Gaia. And when she was having babies, he was not very happy about it. And he ended up trying to push the babies back into her womb. What are we basically seeing here? Archetypically, symbolically, we see a difficult fusion between very, very different elements. As we said, the sky is not biological. Uranus has to do with thoughts, with speed, with ethereal qualities. And so it's an energy that goes much faster than the biological processes, the physical processes. So Uranus doesn't feel very comfortable in a body. It wants to fly. And Gaia, the Earth, Taurus, is, on the other hand, representing a slower, more organic, and obviously physical expression. Our body, our connection to food and to the senses and to beauty and to music and obviously nutrition and sexuality. So what we see in this fusion, we see on the one hand that even though they're very different, there is an attempt to really connect heaven and earth. But we also realize it's not happening easily. And the way we experience this in our own reality, consider that Uranus represents innovations. It represents scientific development, the thoughts, the logic, the higher mind, and the desire to advance civilization. So Uranus is always faster than everyone. It's a few steps ahead of everyone. And it's, as an archetype, it's an energy that relates to really paving the future. But there's very little patience for those who are, taking their time. And Taurus are known not to really rush anywhere. Taurus doesn't like change, doesn't like speed, and is content with whatever's around them. So there's a desire to really root with Taurus, whereas Uranus wants to revolutionize, innovate, transform, and move forward. The way we can see both the problems and the beauty of this configuration, we talked about the rape of Uranus on Gaia. And we basically realize that this has a lot to do with the way our lives are on the one hand, in one way progressing. But we also see how industry and science can sometimes rape nature. We see how progress and development and civilization, so to speak, can basically pollute the environment. So it's a form of rape of nature. And that captures basically where we're at today when we see that there is a discrepancy, there is an imbalance between that need to innovate, to advance, to produce faster, to live on cell phones, on computers, and lose touch with our bodies. And people, really locked on their screens and, not playing outside, not spending time under the sun, locked in a virtual reality and losing touch with the physical, the organic, the natural. And so this transit of Uranus in Taurus is going to recapture these themes, hopefully to bring balance again. But as it is with everything, it's a challenge. We don't know if we're going to make it or not. That's the intent. Now, interestingly, they had a child. I mean, they had many children, but one of them was Saturn. Saturn is born from the union of Uranus and Gaia. And when Saturn, who represents time, and he represents morals and ethics, when Saturn saw that his mother was suffering and that Uranus was basically brutal with her, he really developed a lot of resentment towards his father and decided to protect his mother and castrated his father. So Saturn, in a way, is the force that keeps the balance and sees if there's anything that's out of order, if there's anything that's unethical, that needs to be rectified. Saturn, by definition, represents karma. And so he severs, he castrates Uranus and saves his mother. But on the other hand, it's a broken relationship. So Saturn now is going to trine Uranus. Saturn is in Capricorn, as you can see here, and it's trining Uranus in Taurus. Later in 2020 and 2021, Saturn will move into Aquarius and square Uranus. That's going to be interesting. The reason is that Saturn will move into Aquarius, which is the sign of Uranus, and Uranus will be in Taurus, which is an earth sign that is much more strongly affiliated with Saturn. So in a way, they'll be in each other's territory. Saturn will be in Aquarius, Uranus will be in an earth sign that's very Saturn-like. So 2020, 2021. We won't expend too much on that during this talk, but you can find on my website, again, more material on this. In any case, moving along, what can we expect? If Uranus brings progress, upgrade, innovation, wherever it goes. The intent of Uranus is to raise the energy, is to bring whatever it touches to the sky, to the highest. In our own chart, Uranus represents our highest potential. Or, it's referred to as the genius. And we each have our own genius. And that's where Uranus is in our chart. So it's the highest essence, it's the most sophisticated, the bright, and the capacity to be mentally creative. So to really bring new solutions, new insights, new ideas forward. And so if that touches the domain of Taurus, that's where the innovations will be implemented. What does Taurus represent? Physical, matter, body, agriculture, sexuality, music, arts, money, resources, banking. So these are some of the areas that will be affected by Uranus and will go through a rapid transformation. And the challenge is to integrate that, to not just rush forward and rape the earth and rape our own body, but to elevate, to enhance, to develop, to refine in a way that actually is healthy for all of us. Otherwise, what we will have is a bionic body. That's very Uranus in Taurus, bringing the robot into the flesh, just like this cow in the heavens, space cow. So, is that what we want? Engineered food, electronic food, that's kind of an illustration of how far Uranus in Taurus can go. And it can go even farther than that in, creating food, Taurus, that's going to be engineered and instead of really eating and enjoying with your senses, you're just going to take a pill or you're going to take an infusion. And eating will just be a a quick procedure. It's not going to involve your senses. And the great scare with Uranus in Taurus is the engineering of food to a point where it can corrupt seeds and soil, to a point of no return, to a point of corruption. But hopefully, there will be a counter movement to that of people who will want to develop and enhance agriculture and food in healthy ways, the organic way, through permaculture. So advancement and technology is not just about chemicals or very invasive measures. It can actually be smart and integrated. And you will see both movement. You'll see the Monsanto, going crazy, and now they fuse with Bayer, another big company, and so they're going to become so powerful. Just now they signed this contract. So just ahead of Uranus in Taurus, it seems like they know their astrology and they're preparing to dominate the world during these coming years. And they will definitely do a lot of damage. We can expect that. But at the same time, there will be those who will react to that and who will not who will not succumb to this pressure, because the truth speaks louder than money, ultimately, hopefully. Now, another thing, I wanted to show you is, look at this picture. This is not, a computer generated image. This is actually a cathedral that exists in this world. Um, and so Uranus has to do with the genius, the refined, the scientist, and Taurus has to do with art and with buildings and architecture. So we can really and expect amazing development in the arts, in architecture, hopefully outgrowing, the ugly trends that are currently existing as we keep building glass buildings that just, don't age well, and they don't heat well, and they're not ecological, and they're ugly. So we're going to talk a lot about architecture and agriculture during this talk. But this is, a cathedral that was built, I believe, in the 1800s. Think of how progressive, how advanced that was. I mean, it still is, just looking at it. And you'll see an image of it. So, as we want to understand what's going forward, let's look back at the previous cycle of Uranus in Taurus, starting June 634 to May 1942. You don't need to be an expert in history to remember what happened around those years. It was just before the Second World War, the rise of Nazism, and a lot of madness in this world, which was not just triggered by Uranus in Taurus, but you have to realize that even though Hitler had an ideology, and he was a racist, and basically wanted to expand Germany, his excuses were very much related to the economy and the fact that Germany took a really bad blow during the First World War, and was struggling financially and lost its prestige. So Hitler used that weakness, the depletion of the German people, to boost their morale and try to reignite that vision of a great Germany. What I'm saying is, behind any war, there's usually a financial issue. And since Uranus is going to be in Taurus, and Taurus relates to money, and Uranus is going to create a lot of instability and changes in the financial system, for better and worse, we are at a very, very precarious juncture. And we have to be very careful. I mean, as much as we have control over these things. Interestingly, Uranus has to do with wind, and Taurus has to do with earth. So when you bring wind with earth, what do you have? Tornadoes. Tornado in Osaka kills thousands of people and destroy harvest. Interestingly, famine in China, and then the Great Depression that started before that cycle in 29 and ended after that cycle in 45. Interestingly, talking about the Great Depression, the president around that time was Roosevelt, who was an Aquarian with a lot of Taurus. So he was definitely activated by this Taurus, Aquarius, Uranus, Taurus energy. And he actually took many measures to help get out of the depression. So Uranus in Taurus was actually a strong force to resolve the problems that started during the Depression. Then, during that time, the dust ball. Again, dust is Earth, and that's an event that captures a series of severe dust storms. Once again, wind and earth that damage ecology and agriculture. It was triggered by an aggressive agricultural technique that uprooted native water retained in plants. So they were basically uprooting plants, causing deforestation, and as a result, you had this wind natural event that caused drought and covered everything with dust. Thank you, Uranus, and thank you those who basically don't understand the balance between progress and ecology. So as we move forward, I would like to get into the material here by looking at charts of different figures and learn through these charts what this transit may be about. So we spoke of Monsanto, and this is Hugh Grant, who is the CEO of Monsanto. So he's born with the nodes in Taurus conjunct the moon, opposed Neptune, and then Uranus is squaring that from Leo, opposing Mars in Aquarius. Now that looks very, very close to what we're going to experience now, because Mars is going to move into Aquarius as well. It's going to stay there for 6 months because it retrogrades, and it will square Uranus in Taurus. All this happens around the early degrees of the fixed signs. So Hugh Grant, that CEO, will have a Mars return and will have Uranus transiting his south node in Taurus, and the nodes will be on his natal Uranus. Very strong activation. So you see that he is himself capturing that battle between Gaia and Uranus, the Lord of the sky. Gaia, the moon in Taurus, this feminine energy on the south node. It's really Mother Earth, agriculture, senses, nutrition. And then you have a square to Mars in Aquarius, which is an aggressive mental energy, bringing the technology and the science in a very aggressive way, raping the moon, squaring the moon. And you see Neptune opposing that. Neptune represents victimization, violation of boundaries. So this is very graphically, he's kind of capturing whatever Monsanto's doing. And it's his own battle. You can see that he is himself representing that myth. And we are paying for it. So hopefully, an angel will wake him up during this transit, and he's going to change his way. We can only hope. But in the meantime, I want you to just look at this chart and see that it's exactly what we're talking about, this conflict between the sky and the earth. Oops. Now, another person that really struggled to be in his body and was mostly in his mind, Stephen Hawking, who just passed away, few weeks ago, and born with Uranus in Taurus conjunct Saturn and trine his Capricorn sun. And he has a Virgo moon. So you see how much earth this guy has in his chart. And yet, Uranus in Taurus retrograde shows his struggle to actually be in his body and needing all these machines to talk, to move, to be in the physical world. So another person that, that he was that bionic man. He was half human, half machine, which is very much capturing that Uranus in Taurus. Interestingly, it's conjunct Saturn, which may have to do with a karmic issue on a soul level for him. But that's another subject. Now, his brilliance in understanding the universe and explaining very complex phenomenon is also related to that, because there is genius in Uranus in Taurus. If it works well, it does bring heaven and earth together, and so it brings an understanding of the vastness of the universe in a way that we can integrate on this plane. Now, Hawkins was actually advocating for conquering space because he was very worried about overpopulation on the earth and the fact that it's not going to be sustainable to stay on this planet, and we need to start looking for other options to migrate, to a place where we can expand. So we see again that Uranus in Taurus, that conflict between Gaia and the sky and the other planets and the cosmos. Tesla, the unsung hero, brilliant scientist, who was born with both Pluto and Uranus in Taurus, and interestingly, also Neptune in Pisces. So he was born in the 1850s, and this is the same transit that we're having now, because as Uranus moves into Taurus, Neptune will be in Pisces. So we have a recurrence of two of these planets, outer planets, slow-moving planets. And if we speak of sky and earth, Neptune in Pisces is spirit and earth. So Tesla had brilliant ideas. First of all, he was very instrumental in developing electricity. And even though, he was battling with Edison about which system of electricity would work, eventually, after his death, his theories were rediscovered and, his genius was exposed. So one of the things that Tesla is known for, or at least researching, was free energy. Free is Neptune, because Neptune represents whatever is universal, whatever is natural, whatever is of the divine. So the divine is free, it doesn't cost money. And so freely available resources are very much a Neptune in Pisces phenomenon. But the use of energy, the harnessing, the processing, the integration of the energy is going to be Uranus in Taurus. And so he captured that paradigm pretty well, accurately. We can only hope that, this this research will now be reignited, and this concept of free energy will be again explored, and not uh, sabotaged as it was during his time. So you see a genius here. What makes a genius is not just someone who has bright ideas, but it's someone who can travel different worlds. He can be in the terrestrial world, and he can be in the spiritual spheres, and he can be in the mind. So he could use the different aspects and tools available to him. And that's what made him so unique, and that's what made him able to tap into these discoveries. Sigmund Freud, a Taurus, born a Taurus, and his sun conjunct Uranus in Taurus. And the quote here, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, which is a very Taurian statement, because Uranus will tend to philosophize, to overthink, to overanalyze things, whereas Taurus says, it's much simpler. Just give me food on the table. Just hug me. Happiness is in simplicity and appreciation, whereas Uranus tries to constantly modernize, advance, create breakthroughs. So Uranus is definitely complicating life, but also advancing life. If we have laptops and we can talk today, and you don't need to travel to hear me, it's thanks to Uranus, because of technology. And yet sometimes we overdo it. We overthink, we complicate our lives, and we lose touch with simplicity. So we can see Freud basically also having his own dilemma and his own struggles between heaven and earth, between sophistication and simplicity. Another very interesting quote from him: it's impossible to overlook the extent to which civilization is built upon a renunciation of instinct. Instinct is obviously Aries and Taurus. It's very primal energy. It's the primary brain, it's the hunger, it's the senses, it's sexuality, it's all these things that are triggered before we think. You may think you're not hungry, but your stomach will tell you you're hungry. Another interesting quote, I don't know if you can see it, but I will read it to you. Civilization began the first time an angry person cast a word instead of a rock. Now, if you think about this, how Uranus in Taurus is that? Obviously, Taurus is the rock, Uranus is the word, the thought. And in his chart, you can also see that Uranus conjuncts Mercury, which is more directly related to speech and words, but they're both mental. So you see his juggling of words and the primal versus the mental. And so what does that mean, to cast a word instead of a rock? It means being able to fight with diplomacy rather than physical brutality. So instead of really being this primal beast that will, kill in order to get its meal or its land, we see instead people talking, people arguing with civility, being civilized, and reaching possible agreements. So that's again a very Uranus in Taurus, Mercury in Taurus conjunction. The next, so you see three scientists who were very advanced and changed really the course of history in many ways. Hawkins and Tesla and Freud in very different areas. One is psychology and sexuality, the other one is in electricity and energy, and and astronomy for Hawkins and the universe. Now, a completely different area. This is the chart of Gaudi. Gaudi was a Spanish architect born in the mid-50s as well. And he is the designer of that image of the cathedral that I showed earlier on. An incredible genius who created this masterpiece, very, very weird formation in architecture. And many of them are built in Barcelona in Spain, with, you know, a city that is really a treasure of culture and architecture, especially because of him. So he was born with Uranus in Taurus conjunct Saturn as well. That's the same as Hawkins. That's the same as, you know, people born in the early 1940s. They had that Saturn conjunction. So people born with the cycle of Saturn and Uranus are constantly juggling the old and the new. Saturn is the old, is the ancestral, it's the elder, whereas Uranus is the new, it's the innovation, it's the quick, it's the new generation. So when people are born with Uranus and Saturn, at best, these are people that can connect the past with the future. But otherwise, they can be people who experience a clash between the past and the future. And usually it's a little bit of both. Because as they struggle, they actually bring solutions. So there's both a struggle and a breakthrough. So you can see, you know, the very Taurian, it's very physical, it's very aesthetic and measured and sick. You know, the mastery of Uranus, the genius of Uranus in the physical of Taurus amounts to sacred geometry, sacred proportions. What is beautiful physically? Something that emanates truth, something that is harmonizing with nature, just like a, you know, music that sounds very soothing, very beautiful. When our senses, whether it's hearing or watching or tasting, when our senses are pleased and satisfied, there's usually something that is sacred, something that is harmonized with the higher worlds with the lower worlds together. And that's what Gaudi really did, is he brought not just construction, but he brought proportions and geometry and created, you know, lasting beauty. Because when we look at his creation, we don't only see, like we said, a building that will be functional and very soon look ugly because it's obsolete. But this is architecture that lasts, you know, more than a century, and it is still relevant. It still amazes us 200 years later. So that's when you know that heaven and earth created a beautiful child and not, you know, a rape. So this is the Sagrada Familia, that cathedral in Barcelona that is still under construction after 200 years. No, I mean 100 years or so, 150 years. And that's the cathedral. The photo that I showed earlier was the inside. So you see how earthy it looks, and yet how modern it is inside. What I really find fascinating in this creation is that fusion of old and new, that fusion of earth and sky, and how unique and fascinating it is. This is another other pieces that he created. That's again in Barcelona. So you see the round shapes and the coloring and many curves, which is very Taurian and very unique, almost alien-like. So another, expression of that Uranus in Taurus, bizarre and yet beautiful. It looks like the house of aliens or the house of elves. And at the same time, it's very earthy. Now, look at this. This is actually a project that is now, in this time, in process. It's created by an architect from Belgium called Vincent Godot, and another Indian architect. And it is, if I understand correctly, it is going to be built in India. And so you see a structure that is integrated into nature. And the purpose of this construction is to be completely autonomous energetically. So the structure is built to produce all the energy that it will consume. The electricity, the water, everything is going to be recycled. And so they aim for a complete integration and self-sustaining mechanism. It's obviously very beautiful, and you see that fusion of futurism with earth and organic. So you see how nature can integrate with industry, with progress. We don't need to live like cavemen in order to honor nature. We could have our comfort and our modern gadgets and still be in harmony with our environment. It's possible. That's absolutely possible. The problem is how slow our leaders are to integrate that. Now, Vincent, oops, where is he? Just a moment. So here is his chart. His name is Vincent Calabeau. Sorry, I didn't pronounce it accurately earlier on. So he's a French-Belgian architect. And I looked at his chart, and he's not born with Uranus in Taurus because he's too young. He's born in 1977, but in the opposite sign of Taurus, and his Uranus opposes Mercury in Taurus. So you have that axis of Taurus and Scorpio with Uranus. Now, this project that we're talking about, you can see the image, another image on the side, will take place, will be initiated during the transit of Uranus in Taurus. Now, fascinating and maybe a coincidence, maybe not, but the name of this project is called Hyperion. And Hyperion was one of the children of Uranus and Gaia in the mythology. So he named that whole thing, amazing structures, Hyperion, as if he understood that this is really a fusion of heaven and earth. So maybe he does know his mythology or his astrology, or maybe it's all synchronicity. I think at the look of his chart, he knows why he called it that. So we look forward to incredible inventions and development in architecture and arts. And I was looking at the chart of Van Gogh, who is definitely another genius, and also born in the mid 1800s, with that conjunction of Uranus and Saturn in Taurus, the same as Gaudi, and Pluto there as well. So he was part of the movement of impressionists who completely changed uh, the way painters painted. Instead of painting portraits, they started to paint nature. They started to free their style. And Van Gogh was not among the first to do that, but he definitely captured that trend. And interestingly, this whole generation of impressionists were born with Uranus in Pisces, which is that need to go back to the simple elements. So another artistic expression where we see innovation and change. But as Van Gogh, we know, struggled, he was also having his out-of-body experiences and difficulty being here on the planet, being in his body and mutilating his body as he cut his lobe during a moment of madness and hysteria. So you see that struggle to be in the body, that connection between the genius, the mind, and the earth, the body. It's interesting also that Van Gogh struggled financially, and you really think about their lives. And he sold one painting when he was alive. He lived in poverty and misery. And now his paintings are selling for millions. And he couldn't enjoy it. So think of that Taurian signature and how unintegrated he was in the physical dimension. He couldn't, he didn't have enough money. He was not comfortable in his body. It's all about that split. And he ended up, on the one hand, creating an amazing fusion of heaven and earth, but he didn't live it himself. Now, Uranus was in Taurus in the early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. Also, with Saturn in Taurus. So just as we had these geniuses born in the mid 1800s with Uranus in Taurus and Saturn in Taurus as well, a century later, we have a new generation of Uranus, Saturn in Taurus, and also Jupiter for a little while was in Taurus, so a triple conjunction. So going back, the Van Gogh generation had Pluto, Uranus, Saturn, and the Dylan generation in the 40s had Jupiter, Uranus, Saturn in Taurus. And this is a generation that had tremendous musicians who revolutionized contemporary music. Folk music, rock and roll, they were the innovators. So Bob Dylan, a poet and a musician who basically was a troubadour. He sang, his activism and his folk in a new way. And John Lennon, born also in 1940, same triple conjunction in Taurus, including Uranus. And most of the members of the Beatles, except for McCartney, who was born just a year later, when I believe Uranus was already in Gemini. But Ringo and I forgot the name of the fourth one. So, and John Lennon all had that strong Taurus conjunction, which Taurus is related to music, to harmonies. So the ability to basically bring a completely new approach to music, the fusion of different elements, as the Beatles were famous for. Paul Simon, another genius in music, who incorporate different rhythm, different influences, bringing indigenous music with modern music. Another Saturn-Uranus conjunction, connecting the old with the new in music. Here we are, Pope Francis. As we saw, many scientists and geniuses had this configuration. You'll see quite a few spiritual leaders with Uranus in Taurus. One who is not on this list is also the Dalai Lama, born also in, I believe, 1936, the same year as Pope Francis. So what's about that? You look at Pope Francis, he's born in that generation of Uranus in Taurus in 1936, and his Uranus squares Venus in Aquarius. So we have here what we call a mutual reception, because Uranus is in the sign of Venus and Venus is in the sign of Uranus. So they are in each other's sign, and they happen to square each other at pretty much the same degree. So we see that Uranus-Venus conjunction, square, extremely potent in this chart. And what does it show? I mean, one of the things that Pope Francis is really known for is his progressive ideas, and the fact that he's not a traditional pope, and he's able to look at sexuality, at money, and at all these values in a new way. So he's responding to the new generation and not really alienating people as much. So he's also born during an eclipse, so, a few days after. When you see the sun on the north node, it's an eclipse time. So that also, adds to his prominence and his important public role. Excuse me. But his voice, his ideas are very much in that Uranus in Taurus. And He's going to have a return of Uranus in Taurus in the year 2019, next year, and 2020. So we can expect to hear a lot from him and to see that he will probably advance many new ideas and hopefully help um, help resolve, the economic problems of the Vatican, the wealth of the Vatican. We can expect a lot of development with the Vatican Bank and all the conspiracies about a lot of misuse of money. In a more mundane way, it can also lead to, wanting to really help the poor, elevate Uranus, the conditions for the poor, uh, financial restrictions related to Taurus. So he can be one who will help advance economic system, economic opportunities for people in need. Now look at that. You know that the Pope chooses their name after saints, and he chose Francis, who was very close to animals. He was very close to nature. And when we look at the chart of Saint Francis, who was born in 1181, even if we don't have the exact day, it's around them. And guess what? We compare both their chart, and we see that they have the same Uranus in Taurus. Both Saint Francis and Pope Francis have the same Uranus in Taurus. And Saint Francis squares Neptune in Aquarius, whereas Pope Francis squares Venus in Aquarius. Not a coincidence. So how do we see that in Saint Francis's reality? If you know the story of Saint Francis, and you can watch the movie, beautiful movie, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, about his life. He was born in a very wealthy family in Italy. And his father was a merchant and had textiles. And so you see all this Taurian, wealth and beauty and fashion and exclusive products. So you see that Uranus conjunct the moon and Jupiter. It's abundant, it's lush, it's comfortable. And yet Saint Francis came back from the war devastated on the one hand, but also with, revelation and vision that he needs to restore the true meaning of the church and to really help the poor and to really help those who need help, including the animal world. So he leaves wealth behind and lives in poverty, and all the animals respond to him. Nature, Gaia, the animal kingdom, the vegetal kingdom. And you see basically how he transforms himself on an economic level, living, the opulence, the greed to some extent, and this indulgence of senses to live more authentically, or at least more spiritually, to use money and resources to build a true temple. And that's what he did in building his church, is to use the stones, to use the physical material for the house of God. So you definitely have the square to Neptune here, which brings that spiritual quality and his own battle between spirit and matter, the physical and the spiritual. And that's very much captured in building that church with his own hands. So that act of building is Taurus, and that structure, that church, is going to be the house of God, Neptune. So issues to be expected, as we understand Uranus, sky, elevation, mental, virtual. We can expect the banking system to change. Maybe the cryptocurrency will have a new lease and reinvent themselves. We can expect transformation and change in the food management and availability. This will begin with drought and the destruction of crops. But hopefully, the organic movement will also gain traction and counterbalance, as we said, the industrial agriculture. So earth-related issues, we can expect earth events, tornadoes, wind, but also earthquakes, because Uranus is going to rattle the Taurus, the earth. Territorial reconsideration or disputes. Many countries in the Middle East are Taurus countries, Israel and Palestinian issues with land, Syria and Iraq. All this whole region is very Taurian by nature. So Uranus in Taurus will bring very likely a lot of change in the area, and hopefully solutions. Hopefully they will cast words instead of stones, and find and reach agreements, just as is beginning to happen in North and South Korea. And then architecture and the art, which we definitely look forward to, because we need some beauty in this world, especially as we live in these tumultuous times with terrible leadership and a serious ecological crisis. So interestingly, as Uranus moves into Taurus, the moment it moves into Taurus, it's going to be on the MC in Washington, D.C., which means it will impact Washington, D.C. directly. Bitcoin, Litecoin, the European Union, all are affected by the Uranus in Taurus transit. So I hope this inspires you. I hope this gives you food for thought. I hope this gives you an appetite for astrology and for serious astrology. And I hope you keep investing in your astrology, just like this tree. And really, I would like, to gather with you in a prayer for this transit to bring that balance and to restore the ecosystem, to restore habitat for wildlife, and to have forest growing again, to envision humanity, civilization harmonizing with nature. So take a moment to visualize that and to commit to it. Project that image every day. Thank you, everyone. And may we prosper. May we have incredibly enhanced bodies, nutritious food, great sex, and beautiful houses as Uranus transits into Taurus. We'll have an astrology workshop under the tree. Blessings to everyone. Thank you very much.